13 years ago, my father stood by the front door during a severe autumn storm, looked at me, and told me to get out because he did not need a sick daughter in his house. I was 15 years old, soaked from head to toe, with no money and nowhere to go. My younger sister had spent the evening telling our parents a series of calculated lies, and they believed every word without asking me for proof. 3 hours later, I was in the emergency room after being hit by a car, and the only person who stayed by my bedside was a university professor who refused to let my parents sweep me under the rug. Welcome back to Payback Stories. I'm Rachel, and if you enjoy stories about family drama, betrayal, and karma finally catching up, make sure to hit subscribe and drop a comment. Let's get into it. Growing up in our home, my younger sister Amanda was always the priority. My parents, Robert and Patricia, operated under the rule that Amanda's emotional outbursts were more important than anything else happening in the house. I was 3 years older than Amanda, and I realized early on that the easiest way to avoid conflict was to ask for as little as possible. When I was 11, I won first place at our regional science fair for a water filtration model I spent 3 months building. It was the first big thing I had ever accomplished on my own. I brought the ribbon home, excited to show my mother. I walked into the kitchen and handed it to her. She looked at it and smiled, telling me I had done a good job. Right as she was looking at the certificate, Amanda walked through the back door after her dance lesson. She was 8 years old, crying loudly because she had fallen during practice and the other children had laughed. My mother dropped my certificate on the counter, walked right past me, and knelt beside Amanda on the floor. She spent the next hour comforting her, making her hot chocolate, and assuring her she was the best dancer in her class. Nobody asked to see my science project again. The ribbon stayed on the kitchen counter until it was knocked behind the microwave a week later. That was how our household ran. Amanda was considered sensitive and fragile, which meant everyone else had to accommodate her. I learned to celebrate my achievements by myself. By the time I started high school, I stopped bringing home my report cards altogether. Getting straight A's did not matter when Amanda was having a breakdown over a C in elementary school math. When I was 14, I earned a full scholarship to a 2-week environmental science summer camp held at a state university. It was a major opportunity for a student my age, and I was thrilled when the acceptance letter arrived. I told my parents at dinner. My father looked up from his newspaper, said that was nice, and went back to reading. Amanda immediately put her fork down and started crying. She asked my mother why I got to go away to a college campus while she had to stay home. My mother looked across the table at me and asked if I would consider turning down the scholarship. She told me Amanda was going through a difficult phase and that keeping the family together during the summer was more important. When I tried to explain that this was a competitive program I had worked hard to get into, my father cut me off. He told me I was being selfish and that being part of a family meant making sacrifices for your sister. I declined the invitation the next morning. By the time Amanda turned 12, her behavior shifted from general crying to deliberate manipulation. She started taking my clothes, my school supplies, and my books without asking. Whenever I asked her to return my things, she denied touching them. Even when I pointed out my sweater lying on her bedroom floor, my mother told me to stop starting arguments over trivial matters. And $50 went missing from my mother's purse. Amanda told my parents she saw me standing near the kitchen counter where the purse was kept before I left for school. I had left early that morning to catch the first bus for zero-period study hall, which my teacher could verify, but my parents did not care to check. My father called me into his home office that evening. He told me he was disappointed in my behavior and demanded that I return the money. I told him I did not take it and suggested he ask Amanda. My father slammed his hand on his desk and told me not to throw accusations at my sister to cover my own dishonesty. As punishment, my parents took my phone away for a month and canceled the weekend trip to an amusement park I had been promised for my upcoming birthday. They told me I needed to learn accountability. Amanda watched from the hallway stairs, smiling while my father spoke to me. After that, the accusations became constant. If a dish broke in the sink, Amanda said I knocked it over. If Amanda failed a history test, my parents told me I should have spent more time tutoring her instead of focusing on my own work. When a rumor circulated at Amanda's middle school that she had copied answers on a standardized test, Amanda told my parents I was the one who started the rumor among the older students. My parents believed her immediately. I stopped defending myself. It was exhausting, and I realized that facts did not matter in our house. Amanda provided them with a convenient narrative, and they accepted it because it was easier than disciplining her. I spent as much time away from home as possible. I stayed late at the public library, joined after-school clubs I had little interest in, and took long walks around town just to avoid being in the house. My plan was simple: survive until my senior year of high school, get into a good university, and leave. During the fall of my junior year, I was taking advanced placement chemistry. A classmate named Tyler asked if I could help him understand stoichiometry after class. Tyler was a quiet guy who sat 2 rows behind me, and he was struggling to keep his grade up for soccer eligibility. I agreed to stay behind for 20 minutes after school a few times a week to walk him through practice problems in the library. Amanda, who had just entered the same high school as a freshman, had developed an intense interest in Tyler. She followed his sports team accounts online and kept a notebook in her room where she wrote his name over and over. I knew this because she had left the notebook open on the kitchen table one afternoon. I never mentioned Tyler to her because I did not think my school study sessions had anything to do with her. One afternoon, Tyler stopped by my locker to thank me for helping him pass his midterm exam. He asked if we could keep studying together for the final exam later that semester. I told him that was fine and handed him a sheet of review notes. As Tyler walked down the hallway, I noticed Amanda standing near the drinking fountain 20 feet away. She was staring at me, and her expression was completely blank. That night at dinner, Amanda did not say a word. She sat at the table and moved her food around her plate without eating. My mother asked her several times if she was feeling sick or if something had happened at school. Amanda just shrugged and kept looking down. I ate my dinner quickly and went upstairs to my room to work on an English essay. That same week, a visiting guest speaker came to my AP biology class. Her name was Dr. Margaret Hayes, a professor of education and public policy from the State University. She gave a presentation on educational access and equity, talking about how systemic barriers affect high school students. I found the presentation fascinating and stayed behind after class to ask her a few questions about her research. Dr. Hayes was patient and articulate. She answered my questions, handed me her professional business card, and told me that if I ever wanted to learn more about grant writing or policy work, I should send her an email. I slipped the card into the inside pocket of my denim jacket and went to my next class. On Friday of that week, a severe weather alert was issued for our region. A heavy storm system was moving in, bringing sustained high winds, freezing rain, and local flooding warnings. By 6 in the evening, the wind was shaking the trees in our front yard, and rain was pounding against the living room windows. We ate dinner in silence. My father kept checking the emergency weather updates on his phone while my mother tried to engage Amanda in conversation. Amanda remained quiet, occasionally glancing across the table at me. After dinner, I cleared my plate, washed it in the sink, and went upstairs to finish my homework. Around 8 o'clock, I heard loud crying coming from the living room. It was Amanda, sobbing heavily. I stopped writing, set my pen down, and listened. I heard my mother speaking in a gentle tone, asking Amanda to calm down and tell her what was wrong. A few seconds later, my father's voice boomed up the staircase, calling my name and telling me to come downstairs immediately. I walked down the stairs slowly. My mother was sitting on the sofa with her arm around Amanda, who had her face buried in a throw pillow. My father was standing by the fireplace, his arms crossed over his chest. I asked what was going on. Amanda pulled her face out of the pillow. Her eyes were red, but when she looked directly at me, her expression changed for a split second. It was completely calm before she forced another sob. My father looked at me and asked why I was making Amanda's life miserable at school. I told him I had no idea what he was talking about. Amanda sat up and pulled out her phone. She handed it to my mother, claiming that I had been sending messages in a large group chat with high school upperclassmen, spreading vicious personal rumors about her, and telling people she was dishonest. She also claimed that I was purposefully flirting with Tyler at his locker to humiliate her because I knew she liked him. I told my parents that I had never mentioned Amanda to anyone in my class and that Tyler was simply a classmate I tutored in chemistry. I asked to see the messages Amanda was referring to. Amanda showed my mother a screenshot of a text chain. My name and profile photo were at the top of the screen, but I had never typed those messages or belonged to that group chat. It was a fabricated screenshot from a free generator app. When I told my parents the screenshot was fake, my father cut me off. He told me to stop lying. Amanda then pulled up her left sleeve and showed my parents a dark purple bruise on her forearm. She told them that the previous afternoon, I had grabbed her arm in the school hallway and pushed her against a locker because she asked me why I was hanging out with Tyler. I stared at the bruise. I had not touched Amanda all week. I told my parents that I never touched her and suggested that she must have bruised herself or gotten it during her physical education class. Amanda immediately began crying louder, asking my mother how I could accuse her of hurting herself just to get me in trouble. My mother stood up from the sofa, stepped between me and Amanda, and told me she was disgusted by my lack of empathy. She told me that denying my actions and blaming the victim proved that I had serious psychological issues. My father took a step toward me. He told me he was sick and tired of the constant disruption I brought to the family. He said they had spent years trying to accommodate my cold, distant personality, but physically abusing my sister and spreading rumors was where he drew the line. I tried to speak, but he held up his hand and told me to be quiet. He told me I was a sick, twisted girl and that he did not want a sick daughter living under his roof for another minute. I pointed out that it was pouring rain outside and that there was a flood warning in effect. My father told me that was not his problem. He said I could spend the night thinking about what I had done and that maybe being out in the real world would teach me some humility. He walked over to the front closet, grabbed my denim jacket, and threw it at me. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to intervene. She refused to make eye contact with me and kept her hands on Amanda's shoulders. I put my jacket on, zipped it up, and opened the front door. The wind blew cold rain directly into the entryway. I stepped out onto the porch and my father slammed the door shut behind me. Through the narrow glass panel beside the door, I saw Amanda look up from the sofa. She was no longer crying. She was sitting upright, watching me leave. The wind was strong enough to make walking difficult. Within 2 minutes, my shoes and jeans were completely soaked. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to call a classmate, but the screen flashed a low battery warning and died before the call could connect. I walked down our street toward the main road. The town library was closed for the night, and the local bus station was nearly 2 miles away. The storm was growing worse, with freezing rain cutting across the streetlights and water collecting in large puddles along the curb. I kept walking toward the commercial district, holding my jacket tight around my chest. My hands were numb, and I could barely feel my feet inside my wet shoes. As I reached the intersection near the highway bypass, I stepped off the curb to cross the street. The pedestrian light was out due to a localized power flicker, and the rain was so heavy that visibility was almost zero. I heard the sound of tires splashing through standing water, followed by a sudden glare of headlights turning from the side street. A sedan slid on the slick asphalt. I tried to step back onto the curb, but my foot slipped on the wet concrete. The car's front bumper struck my side, throwing me onto the hood before I fell hard onto the pavement. My shoulder hit the curb and my head struck the asphalt. The impact knocked the breath out of me, and a sharp pain spread across my collarbone and hip. I lay on my back on the wet road, unable to stand up. The car stopped a few feet away. A driver got out, running over to where I lay. It was a woman I did not recognize. She knelt in the water beside me, telling me not to move and saying she was calling 911 immediately. She asked me my name and where my parents were. I managed to tell her my name, but when she asked for my parents' phone number, I told her they put me out in the storm and told me not to come back. The woman looked at me in shock, then pulled her coat over my shoulders to block the rain while she waited for the paramedics. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics stabilized my neck, lifted me onto a stretcher, and loaded me into the back of the vehicle. The driver who had hit me followed the ambulance to the emergency room in her own car. At the hospital, the medical staff treated me for a severe concussion, a fractured collarbone, and deep bruising along my left side. While I was in the trauma bay, a nurse went through the pockets of my wet jacket to identify me and locate emergency contact information. They found the business card Dr. Margaret Hayes had given me earlier that week. Since my phone was dead and my parents had not answered the hospital's automated landline calls, the ER clerk dialed the phone number listed on Dr. Hayes' card. Dr. Hayes happened to be working late in her office at the university campus 10 minutes away. When the hospital clerk explained that a high school student named Rachel had been hit by a car and had her card in her pocket, Dr. Hayes immediately drove to the hospital. She arrived at the emergency department around 11 at night. She spoke with the attending physician and sat in the waiting area while the staff attempted to reach my parents again. Eventually, a police officer was sent to my parents' house to inform them that their daughter was in the hospital. My parents arrived at the hospital around 1 in the morning. My father walked into the treatment room looking annoyed rather than concerned. My mother followed behind him while Amanda stayed in the waiting room. When my father saw Dr. Hayes standing beside my bed, he stopped. He asked who she was and why she was involved in a private family matter. Dr. Hayes introduced herself calmly. She explained that she was a professor at the university, that I had attended her guest lecture earlier that week, and that she had been called by the hospital because her card was the only contact information found on my person. My father tried to dismiss the situation. He told Dr. Hayes and the attending nurse that I was an unruly teenager who had run away from home after a disciplinary argument and that they would handle the matter privately. Dr. Hayes looked at my father and stated that running away did not account for a 15-year-old walking along a dark highway bypass in freezing rain without a coat or money. She informed him that the police officer outside had already taken a statement from the driver, and that a social worker from Child Protective Services had been notified due to the circumstances of my admission. My mother tried to step in, saying there had been a misunderstanding and that I was prone to dramatic behavior. But the hospital's social worker, a woman named Karen, walked into the room with an intake folder. Karen asked my parents directly why I was outside during a severe weather alert. My father became defensive, stating that I had behavioral issues and that he had every right to discipline his child as he saw fit. Karen noted his statement in her file. She informed my parents that given my injuries, the weather conditions, and the statements made by both my father and myself, I would not be released into their custody that night. My father argued briefly, but when Karen mentioned that formal child abandonment charges could be filed if he persisted, he quieted down. He told Karen that if I was going to be uncooperative, they would leave and let the state handle it. My parents left the hospital 20 minutes later without asking to speak to me again. I spent 4 days in the hospital, recovering from my concussion and fractured collarbone. My parents did not visit once. They sent a package containing a bag of my clothes and my school textbooks via courier, accompanied by a brief note from my mother stating that they thought it was best if we had space from each other. On my 3rd day in the hospital, Karen, the social worker, sat down with me and Dr. Hayes. Karen explained that temporary emergency foster placement was being arranged. Dr. Hayes, who is a licensed emergency foster parent through her advocacy work with local youth programs, offered to take me into her home temporarily while the state evaluated the case. When Dr. Hayes asked if I was comfortable with that arrangement, I agreed immediately. I did not want to go back to my parents' house, and I did not want to live in a group facility. 2 days later, I moved into Dr. Hayes' house. It was a quiet, orderly home near the university campus, filled with bookshelves, plants, and quiet study areas. Dr. Hayes gave me my own room, helped me arrange my medical follow-ups, and coordinated with my high school so I could complete my junior year coursework online while my collarbone healed. The legal process moved forward over the next several months. My parents made no effort to regain custody. During the formal dependency hearings, my father told the family court magistrate that I was unmanageable and that they were willing to relinquish parental rights rather than deal with state oversight. The judge formally approved my long-term foster placement with Dr. Hayes. My parents removed all my photos from their house and told neighbors and distant relatives that I had chosen to leave home to live with a relative. Later, when Amanda entered college, she told her friends that her older sister had died in a car accident years ago, finding it easier to pretend I was dead than to explain that her family had been investigated for child neglect. Living with Dr. Hayes changed my life completely. She treated me with respect, expected me to work hard, and encouraged my interest in academics. She taught me how to analyze policy, how to structure research papers, and how state funding systems worked. Under her guidance, I finished high school at the top of my class and earned a full academic scholarship to the state university. I spent 4 years pursuing my bachelor's degree in public policy, graduating with highest honors. Dr. Hayes attended my graduation ceremony, sitting in the front row and celebrating my achievement. After graduation, I went straight into a master's program in educational administration, focusing on support systems for displaced and at-risk youth. When I was 25, I accepted a position as a program coordinator at a nonprofit policy institute affiliated with several regional universities. Drawing from my own experience, I designed an initiative called the Second Chances Higher Education Grant. The program provided full housing stipends, academic mentoring, and emergency financial support for college students who had experienced family separation, foster care placement, or legal abandonment. Over the next 3 years, the program expanded rapidly. We secured grants from private foundations and state education boards. By the time I turned 28, our initiative was operating across 8 university campuses, providing aid to dozens of students every semester. I was promoted to senior director of the program. In the spring of that year, my colleague Scott came into my office with a formal request letter. The administration at Riverside State University, a large public institution in the state, had invited me to be the keynote speaker for their spring commencement ceremony. The university president had requested a speaker who could address resilience, youth advocacy, and educational equity. Riverside State University was the exact school Amanda attended. I knew through public institutional directory records that Amanda was graduating that semester with a degree in communications. Scott asked if I wanted him to accept the invitation or pass it along to another director. I sat at my desk and looked at the request letter. I realized that after 13 years, I felt no anger or desire for a dramatic confrontation. But I also recognized that my story was legitimate, my work was real, and I had no reason to hide my success or turn down a professional honor just because my biological family might be in the audience. I called Dr. Hayes that evening and told her about the invitation. She told me that if I accepted, I should deliver the speech strictly as a professional, focusing on the facts of my work and the purpose of the scholarship program. She agreed to attend the ceremony with me. The following morning, I instructed Scott to accept the invitation. On the day of the commencement, the university held the ceremony in its main auditorium, which seated over 3,000 people. I arrived early, met with the university president and administrative deans in the faculty green room, and reviewed the event schedule. My name was listed in the program as Rachel Sterling, director of the Second Chances Initiative. When it was time for the processional, I took my seat on the main stage alongside the university department heads and guest dignitaries. Dr. Hayes was seated in the reserved faculty guest section near the front of the hall. As the graduating students walked in wearing their caps and gowns and filled the main floor, I looked across the rows. Sitting in the 4th row of the communications department section was Amanda. She looked older, but her appearance was largely the same. In the elevated family seating section about 8 rows back, I spotted my parents, Robert and Patricia. My father's hair was gray, and my mother looked tired, but they were sitting together, watching the graduates move to their seats. The university president opened the ceremony with welcoming remarks, highlighted academic achievements from the graduating class, and then introduced me as the keynote speaker. He read my professional biography, detailing the growth of the Second Chances Grant and my work in educational policy. I walked to the podium, arranged my notes on the stand, and adjusted the microphone. The auditorium quieted down as I looked out at the audience. I began my speech by discussing the structural challenges facing young people who navigate high school and higher education without traditional family support. I spoke clearly and professionally, using plain language to explain how institutional safety nets can mean the difference between a student slipping through the cracks or building a stable life. To contextualize the mission of our grant program, I shared a brief, factual outline of my own background. I explained that at 15 years old, I had been turned out of my home during a winter storm following a family conflict, hit by a vehicle on a public road, and left without parental support while recovering in a hospital. I shared how a university professor stepped in, provided legal foster care, and demonstrated the impact that a single supportive adult can have on a young person's trajectory. I explained that this specific experience was the foundation for the Second Chances Initiative, which had now funded housing and tuition for over 80 students across the state. As I spoke, I kept my delivery calm and measured. I did not mention my parents or sister by name, nor did I use emotional adjectives. I simply stated the facts of my trajectory and the outcomes of the program. From the podium, I saw Amanda's reaction. When I mentioned my age and the circumstances of the storm, she froze. She looked up at the stage, her mouth slightly open. The two graduating students sitting beside her looked at her, then back at the stage, and then whispered something to each other. Amanda lowered her head and stared down at her lap for the remainder of the address. In the family seating area, my father had stopped looking at his program guide. He sat completely still, staring directly at the stage with his hand over his mouth. My mother leaned back in her seat, looking down at her hands. I finished my speech by emphasizing that personal resilience is built through stable community structures and professional advocacy, not isolated struggle. The audience responded with long, respectful applause. I thanked the university president, walked back to my seat on the stage, and sat down. When the ceremony concluded an hour later, the graduates and their families moved out toward the main campus plaza for photographs and receptions. I remained backstage briefly to thank the event staff, then walked out to the side lobby to meet Dr. Hayes and Scott. As we stood near the administrative exit, I heard someone call my name. I turned and saw my parents standing 10 feet away near a concrete pillar. Amanda was standing behind them, holding her diploma folder, looking uncomfortable. My father stepped forward. He looked aged and hesitant. He asked if he could speak to me for a moment. I stood my ground, keeping a neutral expression, and told him he could say whatever he needed to say right there. Dr. Hayes stood quietly beside me. My father looked at Dr. Hayes, then back at me. He said that he had no idea I was the keynote speaker and that hearing my speech had been difficult. He said he wanted to apologize for the way things were handled 13 years ago and admitted that they had made a severe mistake in how they treated me. My mother added that they had felt guilty over the years and had tried to follow my career through online university articles when my scholarship program was featured in the local news. I looked at both of them and told them that an apology 13 years after abandoning a child at a hospital did not fix anything, but that I accepted their acknowledgement of the facts. I told them clearly that I was not interested in building a relationship with them, rebuilding contact, or pretending that we were a family. I explained that my life was established, stable, and complete, and that I intended to keep it that way. My father asked if there was any chance we could sit down for dinner sometime to discuss what happened. I told him no. I said that choices have long-term consequences and that the boundary I set 13 years ago was permanent. At that moment, 3 of Amanda's graduating classmates walked up to her holding cameras. One of them looked at Amanda and asked if the speaker on stage was really her sister. The classmate noted that Amanda had always told everyone she was an only child whose older sister had died in a car accident when they were young. Amanda stood there, unable to offer a coherent explanation. She mumbled that it was complicated. The classmates looked at Amanda, then at me, and then at my parents. The tone among them turned awkward and cold. One of the classmates told Amanda they would see her later, and all 3 walked away toward the main plaza without taking photos. Amanda turned to me, her voice trembling slightly. She said she was sorry for everything she had lied about when we were kids, claiming she was young and did not realize how far things would go. I told Amanda that while she was 12 when the lie started, she had been an adult for 7 years and had chosen to maintain the falsehood that I was dead rather than take responsibility. I told her I bore her no active ill will, but that I had no desire to have her in my life. Scott walked over holding my briefcase and reminded me that we had a lunch meeting scheduled with the regional program donors at 1 o'clock. I nodded, thanked him, and turned back to my biological parents and Amanda. I told them I wished them well with their lives, but asked them not to contact my office or visit my workspace in the future. Dr. Hayes and I turned and walked out the glass doors toward the parking structure. Behind us, my father called my name once, but we did not stop or turn around. In the weeks following the commencement ceremony, my father sent 2 emails to my public university work address, asking for a meeting. I did not reply to either email, and after a month, the messages stopped. Amanda set her social media accounts to private after several of her college acquaintances posted comments asking about her graduation day, but I did not follow any of the online fallout. My work with the Second Chances initiative continued to grow. Over the next 2 years, we expanded the program to 3 additional universities, securing a major state endowment that ensured the grant would operate permanently. I am 28 years old now. I live in a quiet neighborhood near the university, work in an environment where I am valued for my expertise, and spend my holidays with Dr. Hayes, who is my real family in every way that matters. I learned that family is not defined by biological ties or the obligations people try to force upon you. It is defined by who shows up, who stands by you when things are difficult, and who helps you build a future. I did not need revenge to fix my past. I simply needed to build a life so strong that their choices no longer had any power over me. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Payback Stories for a new family drama story every day, and I'll see you in the next one.